This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by iZotope, Native Instruments, Atom Audio, and SAE Institute. You're hearing my voice right now mixed through iZotope, Ozone, and Velvet on Atom Audio monitors and headphones. Make sure to get my free mixing course at mixmasterbundle.com, and please check out our awesome sponsors using the links in the show notes. And please like and subscribe to this YouTube channel because it's a great way to help support this show. Now get ready to rock.
And part of what technology now has allowed us, in a way, is the absolving of decision-making. And I think that that's kind of like a bit of a mistake. I think, a smarter person than me once said, decisions are your friends. And when we used to record on, 16 or 24 tracks, you had to make decisions and you had to build upon them and complete the song with whatever tools you had. You didn't have unlimited playlists to do 17 solos or 17 vocal takes or anything like that. You had to make a decision. If you wanted to change something, often you had to erase something else. So you had to decide, well, is this new thing going to improve things more than the thing that we have there already?
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. From synths to strings to studio guitars, Complete 15 has it all. Native Instruments' flagship bundle gives you everything you need to create pro music in any genre, with cutting-edge instruments like Contact 8, Massive X, battery, guitar rig, and session guitarist for lifelike electric and acoustic guitar parts. Use our code ROCK10 for 10% off at nativeinstruments.com or get started with Complete Start totally free. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lid Shaw, and welcome back to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is David Botrill, a 3-time Grammy Award-winning producer, engineer, and mixer who's had over 15 million copies of his work sold worldwide. He's worked with a diverse spectrum of prolific artists such as Peter Gabriel, Smashing Pumpkins, Tool, Muse, Silverchair, King Crimson, Godsmack, and Rush, to name a few. And David has also worked with some of the most influential world musicians, notably Youssou N'Dour and Baba Maal of Senegal and Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan of Pakistan. David spent 20 years living in the UK, followed by a term in New York, but has settled back in Canada where he has a mixing studio. Even still, David still spends much of his time working in the US and abroad. So a big shout out and a thank you to Brian Murphy at Sound Porter Mastering for helping to make this happen and connecting us. Please welcome David Botrill to Recording Studio Rockstars. David, are you ready to rock, man?
I'm ready to rock, Liz. Thanks for having me.
It's great to have you. Sometimes, it's funny. Sometimes just getting rolling out the gates with the podcast, has challenges like trying to get into a good first take in the studio, right?
Yeah. That's why we always record the first take, but then we keep taking more until it's just right.
Yeah, so in full transparency, Rockstars, you heard take 3 of me reading the intro there. So, David, welcome to the show, man. It's really a pleasure to meet you, and it's a pleasure to have you here on the podcast. I gave, a brief introduction there from your bio and website too, but tell us a little bit in your own words, if you don't mind, give us the brief story arc of how you got started out in music and got to this point where you're now building a new studio, which we're going to be talking about here in just a moment.
Cool. Well, I started in a small town called Dundas, Ontario, where I grew up. And my girlfriend at the time, when I was just in the midst of a college program that I was not very enamored with, had an uncle who owned a recording studio. That uncle's name was Bob Lanois, and his brother Daniel Lanois is the very well-known Canadian producer. And so I went to that studio and asked for a job, and green as a frog going in there. But they said, no, you can't have a job, but what you can have is an internship. Before really internships were a thing, so I would cut grass and wash windows and do anything I could, because when I first walked into that studio,
shovel snow, right? Shovel snow.
Shovel
too,
snow, all that, all that. Yeah, I know you Southerners, you're getting a little taste of it nowadays. But I didn't know anything about studio recording. I was a sort of bush league guitar player in bad garage bands. But I knew I wanted to do something with music. So I went into that studio and I literally walked in the door, turned to the left where the control room was, saw that, and I was like, that's what I want to do. I don't know what it is, but that's what I want to do. So I asked them for the job, and they said, no, you could be an intern and come and hang out. We'll see if we like you. So I sort of have a habit of being able to make myself somewhat indispensable. So I got in there and I started learning about studios from some great engineers and learned how to be a very good assistant, and then subsequently learned how to be a reasonable engineer. And then a couple of years later, when Dan was going over to England to work with Peter Gabriel, he sort of grabbed me and said, you want to come along and see if you can help me out? So I did. And, I helped out over there and ended up jumping ship and staying there for about 20 years.
Wow, that's amazing. It's funny, my internship here was at Woodland Studios in East Nashville, and one of the first records that came through when I was interning was Emmylou Harris' Wrecking Ball.
Okay.
So I got to meet Daniel and
nice.
And see, all these great musicians that he brought in from New Orleans and all over.
Well, the funny thing is, the first music that, if I can go on a little tangent on it, the first
Please.
music at Grant Avenue Studios, which is the name of the studio that Bob and Dan owned, was Brian Eno and his ambient series of recordings. So
oh, wow.
I would either be assisting or making tea or picking up food for those sessions, that sort of thing, Harold Budd, Michael Brook, John Hassel, those sort of recordings. And then on Sunday nights or Sundays, for as long as we could go, we would do jingles. So I'd have the jingle side where you learn a lot of chops of editing and quick engineering and stuff like that. And then during the week, it was all ambient music. So it was a very odd introduction to studio life. Not in any way the sort of pop music or rock music. There was rock music going on too, and some country and folk. But a lot of it was just, completely non-commercial music.
That's fascinating. So why don't we just, jump right in with some thoughts there? What is some stuff you remember learning about recording on those early sessions? And, how does one record an ambient record?
I think their philosophy was really like, try things. Experimentation was really the order of the day. There wasn't an agenda other than let's make some very interesting sounds and try to create some really interesting melodies to put into this cloud of beauty. There really wasn't. Obviously, there weren't verses, there weren't choruses. A lot of the things like John Hassel stuff or Harold Budd, it was based upon their performance and their melodic sensibilities, and then building rhythms and grooves around them. It was very early with the John Hassel projects. It was very early. They called it trapping at the time, but it was sampling. So it was like the one shots from Electro-Harmonix or Digital 16s, and you would sample into that, and they would call it trapping. You could trigger that with it was literally a metal box with a leather pad on it. And
that was the trigger?
That was the trigger, and you could hit it. It was just like a contact mic underneath a leather pad. So you could hit it with your hand or you could hit it with a stick, and it could be a loop. It could be, anything. It could be just a sound. But, of course, it had that 8-bit crunchy tone, so everything had this very odd sort of characteristic to it. So the album that he was making at the time with that sort of approach was called Power Spot. And it's really kind of, it was in that same genre that Eno was doing with David Byrne and My Life in the Bush of Ghosts album and stuff like that, along with the airport music for airports, the Apollo soundtrack that he and Dan did, things like that. And it was really just kind of trying to stretch the boundaries and use the studio as more of a creative tool than as a documentary device.
What a cool thing too. And just thinking about making records where that kind of experimentation has a life outside the studio. The record goes somewhere.
That spilled over into certainly Dan's career in the kind of work that he did with Emmylou, with U2, with Peter.
Yeah.
And it certainly sort of informed my early education in recording and breaking rules without breaking equipment. You didn't want to ruin things,
Right.
but breaking rules and trying things, putting chaining up different effects and gear and seeing what would come out of it at the end, and seeing what feedback did and how you can then control it and turn it into something else. That's I think probably why Brian liked FM synthesis so much, because it is a lot of that.
Yeah.
Of that.
Now, is synthesis something that you yourself have gotten really into over the years too?
I was never really a great programmer of things. I liked it, but it turned a little bit too scientific for me, a lot of it. So, especially when they lost all the knobs.
Right.
It became more of a bit of a science project than it did sort of a creative tool. I was, I think my skill set was not so much in that. I could try and get some interesting and good sounds, and I was not bad at that. But I think I was better. What I ended up evolving into was I'm a better judge of great performance and of solid structure and solid songwriting structure than I ever was with programming and sort of creation of a sound from scratch.
And so did you mention what your starting instrument was? Did you play an instrument before all this as well?
Yeah, I learned first piano when I was younger, and then guitar.
Okay.
And so that morphs into bass and into keyboards, and could never play drums.
Did you have
percussion,
a chapter of playing in bands as well?
I wouldn't even really call it playing in bands. It was just jamming with friends in garages and bedrooms and stuff. So, yeah. I knew pretty early on that my playing skills were only ever going to be rudimentary at best. I can hack out an idea, and I can show a part that I'm thinking of to a good player and then get them to play it. I'm much better at doing that than I am at playing. Although I love to play, I really enjoy it. I just don't have that last sort of few percent of instinct in that great musicians have. I haven't got that thing. So, and I sort of recognized that early enough and thought, well, but I know what sounds good, and I know what I want people to do, and I can learn to be able to direct them in doing that.
Now, don't you feel like playing an instrument also gives you like a boost up in terms of communicating the idea in the studio too? Like, do you ever imagine it would be really hard to communicate a guitar part to somebody if you didn't actually play guitar? I
mean, it worked for me, but I've also known producer engineers who don't have necessarily a musical playing background who are very articulate at doing it. Yeah. So I think it's more with any creative environment or any creative partnership that you're working on, is just learning communication, how to communicate your ideas to somebody. And the longer your session goes on, if you respect each other, your communication doors open easier after a while, and you're able to articulate what you're trying to get across. And that artist will be able to articulate back to you what they're looking for in the sound or in the mix or something like that.
So I find that even on this podcast, sometimes I get better at articulating as the show goes.
Sure.
Okay, cool. So you were, you found your way over to work with Daniel and Peter Gabriel, and then you were in the UK for quite a while, and that sort of opened the doors to world music as well for you. Yeah.
Yes, the real world definitely was a place that introduced me to music that I would have never experienced, I don't think, or would have been much harder to experience on my own without it being sort of laid in my lap there. We did these sessions not only like individually with each band on Real World Records, but the WOMAD crew would often come in. We did 2 sort of 3-4 day sessions where we would bring in a whole bunch of producers, set up controllers all over the place, and we called them the recording weeks. And we'd do a week of just like recording an album in a day or in a few hours with a band just live off the floor. And then that band would collaborate with other bands. So we would get, Senegalese artists playing with Lapland artists and, sort of Indian and Pakistani artists playing with South American artists. Like it would just, the cross collaborations were the things that were the really interesting parts of it.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating. And then, so that was sort of an introduction to just discovering an appreciation for world music for yourself too, or had you already been listening to things, or was this really an introduction to all of us to be able to start listening to world music?
Yeah, it was more of an introduction for me, for sure. I hadn't experienced anything in Canada that other than through the ambient stuff, the percussion-based, a lot of the percussion-based grooves and music that they were recording during that time. But really, I got much more. I mean, the John Hassel stuff, again, there was sort of more Balinese style rhythms, and there was influence of different cultures in there. But really, it was when I got to Real World and we started, working closely with WOMAD and with Real World Records and all the artists that we did there, Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan, Yusundur, Baba Mal, Masters of Jujuku, all these great artists, drummers of Burundi, all these things that were, fascinating and thrilling for me to record. I mean, there were times where I'd be like, okay, what is that instrument? Where does the sound come from? Okay, well, I'll put the mic there then, and I'll try this one. It was very much flying by the seat of my pants in recording these things because I had no idea what usually it was. I'd never seen a kora before or a djembe or but I thought, well, sound comes from here. Well, and it comes from here too. So why don't we use two mics? We can do it here and here and see what we get,
And then what was the year that you're thinking of in your head then? Is this like...
So I moved to England. I moved
80s,
to England
90s?
in 85, but I'm thinking more around 87 is this sort of time period.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's right when I was in college, probably discovering some of these records for the very first time.
Right.
Wow, so that's fascinating. So then what about Peter? So what sort of drew, do you have anything to say about his interest in world music and how that came about? And then also about you is, had you already done some global travel and heard music from other places, or was this sort of was going to England and doing this stuff also brand new travel for you?
This was definitely brand new for me. I'd never traveled outside of Canada. Well, sorry, I'd been to the United States, primarily in sort of either northern United States, or we went to Florida once as a kid. But yeah, I hadn't really traveled very extensively until I moved to England. So that was the initial, my initial introduction to any of this. It really kind of came together when we, after we finished the So album. There was some stuff in there. I mean, we had Yusu singing on the So album, and some other things. El Shankar played a little violin, but it was really during the recording of the soundtrack for The Last Temptation of Christ that it really kind of came together, and I really had to up my game in learning about these newer instruments that I'd never heard before, and Egyptian musicians coming in and trying to figure out how to communicate with them to get what we needed from them, that sort of thing. It was that soundtrack album where I really cut my teeth on being able to record world music properly, I think.
And then when were you sort of finished in the UK? And
I was there till
York?
about 95. I moved to...
95,
no, sorry.
Okay.
No, I was there 20 years. So it was, probably 2003, 2004, I moved to New York.
Oh, okay, cool.
And then 2 years later, back to Canada.
At Isotope, mixing and mastering just got even smarter. Velvet gives you silky vocals with sibilant slurn de-essing, dynamic tone shaping, and D-click, all in one plugin. And Ozone 11 now includes clarity, upward compression, and AI-powered stem focus to help you master like a pro. Use code ROCK10 for 10% off Ozone or any of Isotope's incredible plugins at isotope.com. Okay. Well, let me ask a couple more questions. So one that pops into my mind is I remember the 90s was a discovery of music for me as well. And you know, world music of all sorts. There were all these really cool records that were starting to come out, like the Secret Museum of Mankind and these labels that were just bringing back, you know, field recordings. So it was easier and easier to discover new music.
Sure.
In a way that was a lot of fun. And throat singing. Do you remember the Tuvan throat singing?
Sure.
In her too. Did you have a chance to do anything like that or any?
I never recorded any Tuvans.
Stuff?
No.
Okay. Would have been fascinating to hear about that too. Let me see here. Oh, so one of the questions I had, you know, we're talking about all this variety of musicians at Real World, and listening to like Peter Gabriel digging in the dirt, for example. One of the comments I noticed was just a deeper bass than many records. You know, there's a lot of low end that reaches down in these records, and I was even able to hear it on small speakers. And I wonder if you had thoughts about that and sort of the way that the balance of frequencies was thought about on records like this.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we had a studio that lent itself to appreciating the low frequencies. So I sort of, you know, I always loved low frequencies. So it's something that I guess, you know, every you know, producer or mixer or engineer has a sort of a sound palette that they like to use. And for me, I did love to, you know, it was always a goal for me to have a strong low end with tightness, like not washy and not cloudy, but to be, you know, as prominent as it could be without ruining the rest of the mix. So I always wanted to feel music, and you know, when you would go to a live show, you know, if it's mixed well, it's not all in the upper mids, it's not all in there. There is some lows, and if you get it right, you can really feel it. You can feel it in your chest, and the music moves you. You know, when you listen to something like the Drummers of Burundi, right, it's thunderous. I mean, I recorded them in a studio where I was up 3 floors and a concrete floor in between. They were down below, and the floor was like lifting up. You could feel it, and that's the exciting thing. Like, it was really viscerally powerful. So you could feel the music like in your soul, and low frequencies often did that to me. I mean, not that I have anything against high frequencies. I don't.
We need them too, right?
You need them too. Although as I've gotten older and older, you know, my ears like, well, maybe you don't need the high frequencies so much anymore. But no, I just I always loved big, fat bottom end, and so that's sort of always what I strove for.
Yeah. Do you to that point? Sometimes I think about frequencies and what we hear in music, and I think sometimes we're introduced to the idea of, you know, human hearing from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, and then you just take that for granted, you know, growing up in this stuff. And then it occurred to me one day, I'm like, well, wait a minute. I mean, the sound waves go lower than that and they go higher than that. It just happens to be like a range that we hear in. And then each of us probably hears differently. So it's interesting to think how we can, you know, it's an interpretation of a range of frequencies. What we decide, that's what we're working in, that's what we're communicating in. And when I, you know, think of going to art museums and you see an artist that only works in like a narrow spectrum of whites and grays or something like that, and you realize, oh, you can make art with very limited spectrum. Do you find that kind of thinking comes into record making sometimes? Is like, you know, you don't need to have all the frequencies in there all the time, or how do you think about that?
I think some artists do that. I like to have a broad spectrum, but I mean, you listen to, you know, Prince records, and sometimes it has no bass, you know, and he got away with it. So, you know, for me, I like to feel everything if I can, but if I'm going to err to one side, I would probably rather have a warm bottom end and a moody thing than it be too bright and too sharp in the top end for me.
Right.
But that's my taste, right? That's not everybody's taste.
Well, I mean, I'm with you on that too. I think there's something about the low end that sort of, you know, hugs you, you know, it embraces you when you're listening and pulls you in. It's comforting. Okay, so when you left the UK and went to New York, tell us about New York.
So I'd been back and forth to New York a lot, making sort of a lot of the, for lack of a better description, the new metal records that I was working on. And I was staying in just like apartments and like rented places. And ever since I was a kid and in the 70s, and I was always enamored by New York. And I remember John Lennon said, well, if I was alive at the time of Rome, I would have moved to Rome because that's the center and that's where everything's happening. And now we live in the time of New York, so I'm going to go live in New York. And, I always was, not that I'm, a massive Beatle fan. I'm a Beatle fan like everybody is. But I was always drawn to New York, and I really wanted to live there. It was one of my dreams as a kid. So I found the opportunity. I was like, well, I'm here a lot. Why don't I just get an apartment here? So I got an apartment and I lived there for a couple of years. And then I met my now ex-wife, who was from Toronto, and sort of ended up commuting back and forth between New York and Toronto, and then ended up just moving back to Toronto.
Right on. And then, so now you're in Toronto, and wait, are you in Toronto now? No,
I'm not actually. I have relocated just recently to my partner's place in my hometown of Dundas. So I've come full circle, and I've moved back home, and I've building a studio here. So
yeah, so let's jump into that. Tell us about your new studio. What are you building, and what are you excited about? So
what I'm building here is a proper full 714 Atmos mixing room. It's in my partner's got a back split house that I've moved into, and the ground floor essentially is the front hall and my studio. It'll be primarily a mixing place, but I will be able to do overdub recording here as well. There's artists that I'm planning on developing here, so once it gets complete, then we'll be doing some tracking here. But I really wanted to get more into. I'd been doing some Atmos stuff up in my studio in Toronto. But with the limitations that were there, I was working more binaural than I was in full surround. So now I've got the whole speaker array here, and I'm
we got a studio guest joining.
I've got a studio puppy. Yeah. That's Ollie.
Do you have a name for your studio yet?
It's it's probably still Main Station Studios. It's what I've always used. Studio. Okay, cool. But we kind of call it McKay Station. So it's the court that we live on. So
does that come from a reference to the subway stop in New York or anything?
No. It's actually Main Station was an island up in northern Ontario near where my cottage is. I have a small. Right. This sounds very opulent, but actually my grandfather in 1939 purchased this little island for a couple $100 with a little ramshackle log cabin, and we've been going there ever since. And so we, built things on there. It's a very lovely private place and small. It's like just 2.5 acres, and depending on the water level. And I've gone up there ever since I was a kid. And there's an island nearby that was the local trading island historically, and it was called Main Station Island. So I just stole that name.
What a cool story! Yeah, I have a slightly similar story. I had a grandfather. On my mom's side and my dad's side that both built houses in 1907 that one of them stayed in our family. One of them is still in our family, and then one stayed until recently. But It's fun to have a place with a lot of history like that to go back to.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, for me, I grew up there as a kid, so it's my what do they call it? The fortress of solitude.
When do you actually give yourself sort of a stereo system, something to listen to music to there? And do you?
It's got we've got newer cabins on it now, and it's got electricity, and it's running water and a septic and all that. So it's different. I'm actually not in the process yet, but the plans are to build another little cabin where I can have a little workstation studio in there to work in the summertime, so I don't have to commute back and forth. It's about 3 hours away, so and a boat ride.
Cool. All right. Well, so 714 studio for Atmos now. Will it be Atmos? It is an Atmos studio that you're building.
Yes, it's an Atmos studio.
Okay, great. What are some things that go into assembling a studio like that? What thoughts do you want to share about decisions you had to make and how to?
There's a lot. I mean, I did a lot of work on, well, first of all, soundproofing as much as I could, because if people are home and I need to work, I don't want to drive people crazy by running over the same vocal line 20 times, right? That's going to, studio work is not really a spectator sport. And if you're sort of idly up in the kitchen doing things and you're hearing the same thing over and over and you're not involved in the project, you'll want to take an axe
kitchen
to the
knife
place.
to something.
So I did a lot of that. So there's a lot of insulation and this product called Sonopan, which is a sound blocking material, goes over top. The drywall is on rails that sit half an inch away from that, so there's air gaps there. And then there's there's panels also on the wall that are diffuser panels. Right now, I'm actually in the process of building my last bass absorber that'll go on the back wall. I've got something there at the moment just as a temporary measure, but I built the two that are beside me now. You can't really see them, but so I've done a lot of building work in here. We ripped this place out to the studs. Basically, got new electricity in here. Three-phase system that comes in isolated, entirely ground isolated. So there's no buzzes, there's no, and then mounted all the speakers in the ceiling on the walls at the back. I've got my subs over here, left and right. I got my speakers and my satellites here. So yeah, it's a lot of equipment purchasing. It's a lot of but there's also the subtleties. See, I'm battling between the sonic purity of the Atmos system and the studio vibe. I want it to be a cool place for people to come in and not be overly clinical. So,
do you feel like the speakers get in the way physically?
I've got them situated so that they're kind of as out of the way as they possibly can be.
Which ones can get in the way? Is it typically the sides, or is it typically the rear speakers that seem like that's where somebody would be hanging out? Actually,
the sides they're pretty much right on the walls, so they're not really in the way. I've got a good friend who's got another studio up in Toronto. He actually soffit mounted them, like he's actually got them in the walls, which is quite cool. Because he didn't have a huge amount of space, so he still wanted the distance, so he soffit mounted them. Mine are actually on brackets on off the walls, and the ceiling's high enough so that they go in and around the cloud that I've hung up on the ceiling. So, but I'll tell you what, it's a lot of panel building. I'm getting sick of building panels. I'll tell you. I'll be honest. At the moment, I'm on my last one, and I'm like, that's the last one I want to make for a while. I love carpentry work. I love doing it, but it's like, okay, I want to get back to doing some music now.
Well, now that you're an expert on building panels, how do we build a panel?
Okay, well, my latest panels are basically built out of 1x4, 1x3. You make one box. You put your insulation in there. You leave a gap. So you're at a 1x6, which is actually only 5.5 inches. You're 1x6. You got your bracing. Stuff your insulation in rock wool, 4-inch rock wool. Then you've got a 2-inch gap. At the back of that, you've got some pegboard for a differential. You got your pegboard on the back of that. You got it on the front of that after the 2-inch gap. Then you got another box, and you get this called CB300. It's insulation but stiff, almost like duct liner. And you stick that over the top of that. So you got fabric. So you got your duct liner, your fabric, your duct liner, your pegboard, your space, your insulation, another pegboard. Hang it 4 inches from the wall.
So the space that's inside is because the Rockwool insulation is sitting against one of those pegboards.
Exactly. And okay. you want the space again for bass absorption.
How do you
and the
make
differential between the two pegboards?
What's the trick to make Rockwool stay put? Does it want to fall down?
Cut your spaces a little bit smaller than 2 inches, 2 feet by 4 feet, so they're compressed.
Okay, and it just sort of holds itself in place. It'll stay.
You can put bracing across the front if you want, but I find if you do it tight enough, it just sits there.
It just sits there. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Dreaming of a career in audio or the entertainment business? SAE Institute Nashville, in the heart of Music Row, offers hands-on programs where you'll learn on professional-grade gear with industry pros, learning through real projects, not just lectures. Explore studio production, live sound, audio for film, and a whole lot more. Or take the entertainment business program to learn about contracts, promotion, and more. With diploma, associate, and bachelor's programs, there's a path for you. Book a tour today at nashville.sae.edu or call 615-244-5848. Yeah, well, that sounds like a pretty awesome panel. What are the things
I'm making my third. And then the ones up on the ceiling, they're just that CB300 2 foot by 4 foot panels of stiff spun insulation, basically.
Now, is that similar to what we have down here, 703, Owens and Corning 703?
Probably,
The rigid insulation?
Yeah, that's it. That's it. 2 inches thick.
And the one that you're referring to, is that a brand difference between what's available in Canada versus what you would find down here? Okay.
Yeah, likely. I didn't research too much in the States of stuff, but
yeah,
I was able to
get
a bat of 6 of them for a couple $100. So I've got a couple of those and I paneled away. And then I've got this great, that's going on to the back one, it's got this great old, it's a fabric, kind of a rug, but kind of a fabric that I got in Africa. That's a picture of an old woman painting on this fabric of an old woman spinning, and with some kids around. And I've had that in every studio I've had in the last little while, so it's going to go on that panel. And that's
spinning like a record.
No,
spinning like a vinyl record.
Yeah.
And then what about fabric? Did you find that selecting fabric is sort of crucial?
I didn't really. I found just like a good, reasonably thick, not too stretchy. It's not as thick as a canvas, but it's like got that same kind of consistency to it. So,
right.
It's still somewhat porous. You can still breathe through it. You have to be able to breathe through it. But other than that, it's like, it's just a nice, strong, but, pliable somewhat fabric. And you stretch it over the top.
So that's kind of the DIY test, is if you can breathe through the fabric, that means air can move through it, right?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Good takeaway. Well, let's see. Let me jump through, look at some of the questions I have queued up for you too. Sometimes I like to ask guests to share an inspirational quote on the podcast. I don't know if you would have one that comes to mind, or if there's just somebody that really inspired you coming up in music and you think of.
Obviously Dan and Brian and Peter were 3 inspirations for sure that I learned a lot from. The great engineers that I learned from in the early days, Bob Deutsch, who took over Great Avenue Studios when Bob and Dan sold it. Kevin Killen, great friend. He worked on the Soul album, still a great friend.
Yeah. Kevin's been on the show. He was a fantastic guest. He talked about doing Black Star and and let's see, it was Yo-Yo Ma, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Kevin's a star.
Actually, I saw a photo of you with Kevin. I think it was on your Instagram. It was at AAS.
Yeah, we went with the AAS in Columbia. Yeah, that was the last time I saw him. He's a great old friend. Yeah.
What about sharing a story of something along the way for you that was sort of an important failure? I mean, obviously, we'll get into more specifics about records.
I've got a good important failure. So after we finished the So album, I was kind of not sure what I was going to be doing because Dan was heading back. We were going to do a record with the Psychedelic Furs, but they didn't really have any songs written at the time. And so Dan said, well, when you've got songs written, call back and we'll see if we can do something. But there wasn't anything to do. So Dan said, I'm going back to Canada. Do you want to come with me and I'll find you some work? Or, we had another month left on the apartment that we'd rented. Why don't you stay here? And I said, yeah, I'll just stay and see what I can find. So I kind of trotted around the studios in London and didn't find anything there. So I went back down to Bath, where the Real World was. And there was things that needed to be sort of just tidied up after the record, tape storage, tying up loose ends, making safeties, that sort of thing. So I just sort of took over doing that work. Ended up, just doing little sessions. The Peter would rent out his studio to some of the local artists or, different people coming in and out. So I would be the engineer for those sessions. Well, at one point, Joni Mitchell came over, and her husband at the time, Larry Klein, was producing an album for Ben Orr, who was the bass player and singer in the band The Cars. He was doing a solo album, and it was being done at the Wool Hall, which was Tears for Fears studio that was over in another village nearby. So Peter said, well, Joan, while you're here, why don't you use my studio if you wanted to do anything? She was like, okay. So, I was, obviously a fan of Joni Mitchell. Had never met her before, but she was a big artist. But it turns out she's pretty nocturnal, and I'm not. And so we spent about a month working, and as I was losing more and more sleep, I was getting more sloppy in my engineering techniques, and missing drop-ins, and then we had a pretty horrific night where I just was messing up the entire night and couldn't do anything wrong. And in the morning, she was like, "Yeah, okay, we can't carry on," and she essentially fired me from the session. We'd had a lot recorded at the time. Peter had sung on some of the music. We'd had Manu Katché come and do the drums. And anyway, I was pretty down about it. And Peter was very supportive. He said, sometimes you just have to know what it's like to be, at the bottom to know what it's like at the top. So, take this in stride. I still believe in you, and you're good. But, I'd never been fired from anything in my life. I was always, successful at things. So this was first big major failure, and I was pretty despondent. I was like, oh, maybe I'm a bit of a fraud. Got into the the imposter syndrome. I was like, I really don't know what I'm doing. I should go back to Canada, be a carpenter, or all that stuff. And then it turned out that as we were building the tour for So, I wasn't essentially going to do it, but then as the album took off, they were doing bigger venues, and so Dave Stolbaumer, who was Peter's keyboard tech and stage manager, basically said, I don't have time to do both these jobs anymore. We're playing bigger venues. We've got to bring Dave along. He knows your gear. And so they quickly got me a visa and took me along on the tour. I was not really a touring guy, but, I ended up on the tour. So we ended up in Los Angeles, did the show. Well, back in the dressing room, Joni and Larry were sitting back there. And so I got, I would, part of my job, I'd be back and forth into the dressing room doing things. Anyway, so I'm back there at one point, and Joni's there, and I'm like, oh, yeah, hi. And she's like, Bottrill, get over here. So I came over, and she said, look, I know I was pretty tough on you over there, but, one thing I wanted to tell you is that, the sounds that you got over in Real World, they were the best we had on the record. So I was like, man, and she didn't have to do that, but I was, very pleased and felt better about life when she said, actually the engineering work that you had done was really good. And, it was a difficult time, and I get it, but, no harm, no foul kind of thing. Wow. So, that was very reaffirming at that point.
That's so funny. And I mean, it really is important to go through those failures. You have to know how to discover the mistakes in record making along a career, so you know what the solutions are, the workarounds and stuff.
Of course.
I don't know. I guess what do you think your takeaway from that would be? Like, I think I'm going to work during the daytime if you don't mind.
No, you know what? I think my main problem was that I did actually know what I was doing, but I lost confidence in myself. And when I lost confidence, I started second-guessing myself and started second-guessing my techniques and my skill at doing it. And once I started doing that, then I started to try to second-guess what she might want and how she might want things done. And it sort of spiraled down into, neither of us getting, what we wanted. So
yeah, that's a good takeaway. I do believe that each of us brings a certain skill set to whatever it is that we're doing. And it really requires us to be confident in what we're doing, and then we can deliver our best work. So when we lose that, it starts to fall apart. I mean, do you think of working with artists in the studio and bands and musicians and trying to make sure that they stay in a comfort zone, a confidence zone? As a producer yourself? As a producer,
I'm not, I know other producers have techniques to sort of breaking down a band and then rebuilding them back up. It's just not in my nature to do that. My nature is to try and see what's best in the band, see where their strong points, build on them, help them improve on their weak areas, but try to bring the most out of the band as they are, and sort of let the chips fall where they may, sort of like not try to replace the band with another band and leave the singer or anything like that. I tend to just try to be like, okay, what's the nut of this band? What's the strongest, characteristics, composition, like where do they need help? And try to find my place in there to try and, help them where I can. So I try to build on the strengths of the band, discover what the strengths are, and then use what skills I have to help them improve in areas where they need help and to solidify the things that they're good at.
To that point, what is the process of pre-production like for you? And is that a big part of making a record?
I think it's a huge part of making a record. And for me, it's actually changed quite a lot, primarily for budgetary constraints. I'm not as often actually in the same studio. It's often done remotely. I'm getting better at doing it remotely. There is nothing that replaces just looking over at somebody and giving a look and them being able to understand what you're doing, especially when they're playing. You can't really do that when you're sitting remotely. You're looking at the whole band. Nobody knows that you're looking at the bass player and saying, pick it up a bit, or so there's nothing that replaces for sure being there in person. But I like to get involved fairly early on in the process. Once they've got like a song that they feel good about, they send it to me, and then I'll listen, say, okay, here's where it's strong, here's where you're going on too long, or you've overstayed your welcome, or here's where this was a really good section. You need to double that up because that's very hooky, or it's very strong compositionally. You need to enforce that, and the thing you've got over there that you think might be cool, you actually need to pull that back a little bit, that sort of thing. But I like to get involved early enough that the band aren't so ingrained in what it is that they are impervious to suggestions of change.
Okay, so a couple of questions come to mind. Working with, you do a lot of great rock records. I mean, you produce, you said you went to New York, you got involved in nu metal. You're working with artists like Mastodon and Coheed and Cambria and Smashing Pumpkins and Muse and so many others. And so those are typically pretty loud when they're playing, So some of the questions I have is if I'm working with a songwriter I might be familiar with, just send me a voice memo. Just play your acoustic and sing and send me that, and I can respond to that. What works when you're remote, or when you're trying to get a rock band to send you something that you can comment on or give feedback to? Is it still a voice memo?
It's sometimes voice memo stuff. It's often like demos that they've worked on in a rehearsal studio, or in a sort of a budget studio that they've gone into, and cut 5 songs in a day or something like that. I mean, there you can get a good enough picture, because a lot of the rock stuff that I've done, the riff is very important, and if it's a strong enough riff, and there's good workings in and around that riff, if they're working in different time signatures, whether that works or not, whether they're able to make the riff work in 5 or 7 or anything like that. But I can usually tell that from a reasonable demo, even from a sort of, we used to call them boombox recordings, where you stick a boombox in the corner and record that.
Get that extra tape compression.
Exactly. And the mic compression that comes in those things, right?
Those things sounded really good sometimes.
They did. They had a character for sure. But I think that, I need to hear something where, and I always say this to the band, it's like, send me something that you're proud of so far. Send me something that you're comfortable sending. Don't just send anything that you don't like, because, then you'll just spend your time defending it as opposed to, being like really excited about it,
Right.
So
Right.
I always ask them to send me things that they feel comfortable sending me, not things that they don't feel comfortable sending me.
Yeah, that's smart. And then to the point of feedback and interacting remotely, I mean, you're right. When you're standing in a room with a band and they're playing loud, the only way you could talk is if you stopped everybody from playing, and then you just disrupted the moment. So like being able to point at somebody and say like down a little bit, like.
Well, often in that
whatever
process, you'll do sections. Like you'll say, okay, like is the verse working? Is section A working? Is section B working? And then you tie it together. And then it's like, okay, you work on that. Okay, now can we make it through the whole song? You try to make suggestions, give ideas to people. The key at that point is not to give too many, because you want somebody to learn one or two things to
Right.
remember that, and then go through it. Okay, figure that, and then build on that. And once that's ingrained, then move on to something else. Try to work on things in a focused way, sectionally, and then try to make it through the entire piece if you can.
Are there typical things that come up across multiple heavy bands as far as stuff that needs to be addressed? I think about songs, even rock bands, but like songs where there's a vocal, and sometimes the drummer, the accents, the pushes between the kicks and the snares don't seem to be supporting the vocal. Mm-hmm. Is that similar with the music that you're creating, or is that a little bit of a different genre?
No, it's very similar. It depends on how the composition was made, because if the drummer has written the sort of groove and the rhythm pushes and pulls, then often the singer has written to that, right? Mm-hmm. So that you want to keep. But the thing that I think I have to struggle with mostly with bands is, they're related, is nobody's really hearing each other very well. So they don't know what somebody else is playing when they're playing. When they've come up with their part, they don't realize that the other guitar player, the bass player's part doesn't jive with that, and they can't hear them. So one of the things I ask people to do is turn down. So in a rehearsal place, like just turn down to half volume, so you can actually hear what this other person is doing, and then you can judge whether your part works over that, and then we can decide which part is more important, or which delivers on the composition better. Then you try to make those decisions within the parts of everything, and you hope that they take away from that. Oh, well, when we're writing, let's listen to each other a little bit more, rather than just blasting out this big heavy riff and then slight variations so that people can hear them. The other thing that I have to kind of work against, especially with young but talented musicians, is overplaying. You just have to say, sometimes less is more. Sometimes more is more, but sometimes less is more. And sometimes you just need to, let the listener breathe, let the song breathe a little bit. And
true.
Give the singer a place to go.
You don't need to play guitar to sound like a pro. Session guitarist from Native Instruments delivers hundreds of lifelike guitar performances, both electric and acoustic, right inside Contact. Whether you're laying down rockin' electric riffs or warm acoustic beds, you'll get 154 electric guitar patterns and over 250 acoustic guitar grooves for strumming and fingerpicking, all grouped into song-ready presets. Dial in recording quality tone with built-in amps, cabinets, mic modeling, and effects. You can drag and drop MIDI into your tracks effortlessly, then tweak tempo, tuning, and feel to fit your song. And with new session packs on the way, you'll never run out of inspiration. Visit nativeinstruments.com, use the code ROCK10 for 10% off, and bring full guitar performances to your next track. No more blisters on your fingers. Howdy, Rockstars. We're back now for the jam session, aka the second half of the show. My guest today is David Botrill, joining us from Canada in his new Atmos studio. David, are you ready to jam?
I sure am.
All right, let's do it. And actually it's funny, I sort of joke around because I come up with these terms for the podcast and everything, and it's silly to ask somebody if they're ready to jam. But you did say your first band, you guys were basically just jamming.
That's it. Yeah. They were just, bedroom and garage jam sessions. It was very bad.
So to that point, my band in college, we really loved the, I guess prog rock aspect, the math rock. We loved, things in weird time signatures, all that stuff. And so when we were rehearsing our drummer, the song that we were auditioning him with was YYZ, which I didn't even actually know how to play on guitar at the time. So to that point, two questions. One, what is YYZ? And two, tell us about working with the band Rush.
YYZ, as we say it in Canada, is the call numbers for Pearson Airport in Toronto.
There you go.
And working with Rush is fantastic. They are some of the funniest and most gracious people you'd ever want to meet. It was a real blessing to be able to work with Neil before he passed away. Mm-hmm. And Geddy and Alex, remain wonderful people. They love wine. They love food. They're extremely wonderful people, and I'm very grateful to be working with them. In the times that I get to. So.
Have you worked with them repeatedly over the years?
So the first thing I ever did with them, it's a funny story actually, when I first moved back to Canada was just when they were working on the album Vapor Trails, the first album after Neil had come back from his hiatus after his family passed away. So they were working at the studio Reaction in Toronto, and I met them, went down. They called me up, said, "Do I want to come down? Maybe do a session, see if we want to work together." And I went down, and we did, and we had a nice day, and I met them. But it turned out it was like, well, this is going to be a long project, and we kind of want you to be on a retainer for the whole year and do this. And I was like, no, I don't really want to be on a retainer for the whole year or on an open-ended project. I'd done that before. Peter Gabriel.
What year was that? What year was that? Because that seems like that kind of thinking sometimes is specific to what era of record making we're talking about.
2005, 6 was that sort of era.
Okay.
Anyway, there's no bad feelings. It was just like, I don't think that I have lots of other things that I'm already booked to do, so I can't just stop and do one thing. So, but it ended up like, I guess, sort of 12 years later, they called me up and said, this album that we did, it was mixed at a time like their fans didn't like the mix of it, and they were not happy with the mix of it because it was done during that sort of the volume war, peak of the volume war. So everything was heavily limited. The mix was very heavily limited, then mastered heavily limited. There was nothing wrong with the recordings. The recordings were fine because they sent me the files and said, would you like to have a go at remixing it? So I said, sure. And I did that, and when I listened to the recordings, there was all kinds of, I don't know if you've been on, the Rush internet, but there's everybody's got an opinion on the Rush internet, and they were all like conspiracy theory about, it's all the recordings were done badly, and and so anyway, the people that I needed to talk to, I said the recordings are fine, they sound great. I'll just do a remix of it, and so I remixed it, and they were very happy with that, and so then they asked me to record them for their final tour, R40 tour. I did a 5.1 mix of their previous R40 tour, but anyway, we've done a few things together, and now I'm in the process of compiling things from Geddy's solo album and working on a surround Atmos mix of that. So again, they're all very gracious people. When I went to Morin Heights before, when we finished the tour, they finished the tour, and I recorded them in Toronto. And then we had plenty of recordings from elsewhere. But we used the Toronto show and the filming of the Toronto show as the R40 surround mix of that. So, I had to take, there were 2 nights and 2 different drum solos and 2 different, actually they changed so much between night 1 and night 2, both from the filming, the lighting, and the sound. It was a completely different vibe of the whole thing. And it turned out that we used most of the second show, but we used the drum solo from the first show. I had to go to Morin Heights and play Neil different ones and see what he liked the best. He liked that one. So we used that. So if you actually watch the film, the whole vibe of the thing changes visually and everything. The lighting's different, sounds a little bit different, but it gives it this otherworldly feel, which actually I think works really well.
Right, because it takes you to a new place.
It takes you to a new place, exactly.
That's cool. So let me think. Two questions come to mind. So one is you mentioned doing Geddy's solo record in Atmos and starting to work on that. What about Atmos really gets you excited? What do you feel like excites you creatively in, adding so many more speakers and to the sound and setting up a whole new way of listening?
I'd say it's both exciting and really challenging because you think at the outset, with all these speakers, there's all kinds of space for everything. But it's actually because it's a bit of a Wild West out there. You don't know. Like I've listened to so many things, and there's so much difference in what speakers get used. Does the center get used? Does the center not get used? I've heard of stories of labels saying, "Oh no, we don't accept anything where the center speaker's used because then they can somehow get the channel of that and steal a vocal and then do a remix, with that." So, and other stories of certain labels, and I don't know which ones, but that will refuse a mix if you don't use enough what's called objects in there, which is kind of irrelevant to. It's kind of like saying, well, they refuse an album because you didn't use enough microphones on the guitar cabinet or on the drum kit. Right. It's like it's a bizarre criteria to try to match. But anyway, I love the idea of being able to immerse people in music. I love the idea of being able to give dimension to it, but I really work hard to try to keep the cohesiveness of a music. Because as you know, in a stereo mix, you can use stereo compression, bus compression, you can use bus equalization, you can gel things together in certain ways and let the music pump together. There are now new things that you can get that will do that over a 7.1.2 bed bus. But these have just come into things. So I'm actually excited about using the new tools that I now have to do these mixes. But being able to surround people, I try to do things in Atmos mixes where I have a rule. I don't want to make anybody turn their head. It's like, oh, what's that over there? I want people to just feel the music coming into it, from whatever. And I've talked to a lot of people and other engineers and friends and how they approach things. So I'll build an amalgam of tools and of styles of things that I want to do. But yeah, it's also learning a new thing, learning a new skill. It's like I'm excited by that because I try to keep myself learning new things and learning new plugins. Like it's learning a new plugin, but it's not quite the same as like, oh well, this is a whole other approach to mixing. So okay, that's cool. Let's try that. Then I'm not just sleepwalking through a mix, or I'm not that I do that, but you fall into habits, you fall into stylistic techniques, and this means like, well, no, I can't do that now. So I've got to find other ways to achieve the same results while keeping the immersiveness going and the intention of the songwriter. I've heard so many that go out there and just like ruin the song because they take what was a great stereo mix and like split things so far around you that you're no longer hearing the song, you're just hearing the individual performances. And that's cool to be able to do that, but I actually want the song to work as a song.
Right. It's interesting to think that some of the knowledge of what's appropriate has to just be arrived at through iterations of records being made and people trying things and making mistakes. So to your point, gaining that instinct, that gut sense that tells you moving those instruments over here is not going to work. That's not making it a good song versus knowing what songs it's a great idea for. You listen to Rocket Man and you hear vocals and guitars in new places, and it sounds pretty great. Well, I guess it depends. Everybody's got its taste space, but then also the stereo compression point. A question I might come to is, when they first introduced the stereo compressor, did anybody even know that that's what it was going to be, how it was going to be used, with that pushing into it thing?
Sure. Well, I mean, SSL created sound, didn't they, really? In a lot of ways. That stereo bus compression.
Right. And you guys were all about the SSL at Real World, that's for sure, right? Yeah. That was wasn't that one of the biggest ones?
At one point, yes. The wraparound was one of the biggest ones, but they got bigger ones later. So, and now, of course, I have a very small setup. It's all in the box, so it's all, essentially, Avid S1s and docks and, and stuff like that. And it's not like I don't have to roll back and forth between, the kick drum and the string parts.
Right, exactly. Now the speakers are sort of all wrap around.
Exactly.
You stay put.
And I stay put.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, when you're mixing in stereo, how often did you find that you enjoyed the process of sitting in the sweet spot versus getting up and walking around the room to listen to your mix?
I spend most of the day in the sweet spot, but I love getting up and walking into the kitchen or walking into another room and listening casually, because that tells you a lot. I find that
Go ahead.
Well, just general balance. You listen to general balance, and you see what are the important things coming through like they should.
What do you think? Do you think that may change with Atmos mixes, where you don't get to walk away to listen to them to see what the mix does?
Yeah, you won't be able to as much. I mean, you can take your binaural, earbuds and listen that way, but I'll still go to the back of the room a bit just to feel a little bit more. Because the thing about Atmos and the way it is, there's a difference in the bottom end that you have to work with subs and LFEs, and how your bass management is working and what are you doing with that. So sometimes there's a lack of it in the sweet spot. So just so that I can feel it and I know that it's like, okay, overall when this down mixes down into stereo, it will have that warmth to it.
iZotope is truly amazing for mixing and mastering your music. Check out the new iZotope Velvet plugin, featuring intelligent sibilance learn de-essing that automatically detects harsh frequencies, dynamic tone shaping with lift and tame controls, and transparent declick to clean up mouth noises, pops, and clicks, all in one easy plugin for polished professional vocals. And now Ozone 11 takes your mastering game even further with the new Clarity module for adaptive spectral enhancement, upward compression in the maximizer for increased punch without losing dynamics, and stem focus to process individual elements like vocals or drums with surgical precision. Use the code ROCK10 to get 10% off Velvet, Ozone, or any fantastic plugin at iZotope.com. In other words, when you're sitting in the sweet spot mixing Atmos, you might not get as much of a enhanced bass playback that you might expect on just sort of listening to a stereo mix somewhere else.
Yeah, that's what I've found so far.
Yeah, I've always loved how the car will exaggerate the low end. Mm-hmm. This is maybe off topic, but one of the things I'm always surprised about is how often big successful EDM tracks actually don't have a ton of low end in the car. I guess they're designed for the big club sound systems.
Yeah, well, they're built to be played off a PA, right?
Yeah, where you can sort of level up the bass.
Yeah, exactly.
To fill the room. You've worked with drummers like Danny Carey of Tool, and many other great drummers. How do you like to approach drum recording to sort of capture both power and detail in a recording?
Well, on the Anima record with Tool, we actually put a PA behind Danny. The idea was that, from my point of view anyway, was that he was playing a lot of electronics, a lot of the pads that he was having, samples that he had going on, and he was playing everything live. He wasn't playing, the drum kit and then the electronics. It was part of the groove. So I wanted it to feel like it was cohesive with the rest of the instrument, of the drum kit. So I set up a PA to really ostensibly just put the electronics through, so they were coming through the room mics. But it turns out I then, well, what does it sound like with a bit of kick drum in there? Oh yeah, that's good. What does it sound like with a bit of snare and a bit of the toms, just the close mics in there? And so they actually pumped out through the PA into the rooms and gave it a little bit more like room compression going on as we were recording. So there's that. I like to generally, if I can, not use every mic in the studio, but I like to mic a lot. Get my tape measure out, make sure the phase is as close as I can get it, and then fix it, if I need to a little bit later in the mix. But I do like to get a good full, not too roomy, but a drum sound that breathes in it. So, I'll mic, obviously top and bottom of snare, but also top and bottom of toms if I can. Couple of mics on the kick drum, enough rooms that you've got enough to choose from for the dimension of the drums, and if you want to, in the choruses, pump the rooms a little bit more, you've got enough of a far room that you can do that kind of thing.
What about the space that you're in to begin with for the drums? How important is it that you select the right studio or the right room? How flexible can we be when we've just got to work with what we've got to work with?
I'm less of a let's find the biggest room to record the drums in, and I'm more of where does the band feel really comfortable? Where does the band feel like they're going to, do their best performance and be exciting as a band playing, rather than obviously there's a certain level of quality that I don't want to drop below.
Right.
But I do want the band to feel like, when the team gets in there and we've rehearsed really well, we're gonna play the shit out of everything really well, and not feel overwhelmed by a big place. Because some younger bands, particularly, they get into a big studio and it's just, they get red light syndrome, and it's like, oh my God, we're in this big studio. Are we worthy of being in this studio?
Right.
You want them to feel comfy, but you also want to get, like, obviously you want to get the, Ocean Way or Blackbird, or, those ones that if you can remove the aura of fame from those studios and the band can go in there and be excited about being there, then that's great. But they can also be like, oh my God, the records that were done in here, and can we live up to that,
Or worse yet, you walk into the gear closet as a producer and you're like, oh, I can choose anything that I see on these walls and bring it into the studio.
Yeah, that's hard. I mean, I love a good microphone collection, but I think that there's a certain benefit to limitations.
Yeah.
And part of what technology now has allowed us, in a way, is the absolving of decision making. And I think that that's kind of like a bit of a mistake. I think, a smarter person than me once said, decisions are your friends. Mm-hmm. And when you decide on something, and when we used to record on, 16 or 24 tracks, you had to make decisions. You had to build upon them and complete the song with whatever tools you had. You didn't have unlimited playlists to do 17 solos or 17 vocal takes or anything like that. You had to make a decision. If you wanted to change something, often you had to erase something else. So you had to decide, well, is this new thing going to improve things more than the thing that we have there already? Obviously, I prefer to have more tools and more tracks to work with to build things. But it's more for me like, well, then I can have flexibility of sound in the mix, so I can use several microphones on a cabinet and choose the best ones. Having said that, I really love making that decision. It's like, nope, this is the guitar sound. Here you go. This one track or two tracks, and this is your guitar sound. I don't like the sort of endless amount of choices, because I think it just delays you from doing things. And at the end of the day, often when you're continuing working on something, you get to a point where you're not necessarily making it better, you're making it different. And that might be better to you because you've been listening to the same thing for the last few months and it's gotten boring to you, the original, but nobody else has heard that.
Right.
So,
that's a good point. That's a great reminder too. I think about that when it comes to comping or takes in the studio and stuff like that. And when you realize you're like, every other version, every other option that we didn't use essentially doesn't exist because nobody's ever going to hear it. So who cares? It's just the one that we choose that matters.
Yeah.
Have you, can you think of examples where you've, maybe you started to reference it right there, where you've used the tools, the technology to tighten, to clean up, to fix things and get everything just right in a production. And then you step back and you look at it and you're like, why don't I like this right now?
Yeah, I try to, as much as I can, let the performances breathe and not grid them. I think I'm sort of saddened by a little bit the standard that's been set by both, sort of people that accept the work that we've done and certain commercial new requirements of what needs to be done, tuning, timing, etc. When you go back, I went to a AES conference in Mexico City, and the great engineer producer Ken
Scott was it?
Ken Scott was there, and during his talk he would play an old Bowie performance that at the end was, wildly out of tune and out of time, but just so passionate and so powerful that it didn't matter, that it had everything you would ever want from a musical performance, except it wasn't in tune and it wasn't really in time, but it was so exciting. And you listen back to old recordings, and I know I'm going to sound like super old dude and listen to the Rolling Stones and the Beatles and stuff, but you listen to it and it's like, well, there are little moments of out of tuneness and there are little moments of out of timeness, but the vibe is great. And the accepting of imperfections in art is something that I think is being lost. And some of I can remember all the things that we try to improve upon and work on in studios, and you have an accident and it's like, oh shit, this doesn't, that doesn't work. But then you can't go back because that's the take you've taken. So you build upon that, and you end up finding that accident becomes one of the most favorite parts of the song for you.
So true.
And we always called them happy accidents, and it's like you didn't intend this thing, but this happened, and look, what a cool thing it ended up being later on in life. We kind of we have to, I say, and for myself, I have to be very disciplined to accept those and not improve them every time. I have this theory about vocalists and tuning, and I find that the more you do, at least in my experience, and I know that tuning and the whole process and the sound of it has become actually a thing on its own, and I get it. But when it is like a human performance and you hear that it's been tuned, I find that you're taking the soul of the performer away, because there's something about the way that an individual vocalist and their relationship with pitch defines kind of who they are. And when you take that away, you're removing character. And you're removing the soul of the singer a little bit. Now, obviously, you want a singer that can sing in tune as much as possible.
Bring you soul in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. So you don't just want a bad unqualified or a poorly trained or poorly practiced singer. Yeah. But if you have a good singer who's got passion, who's got excitement, and then you take them in the studio and you tune the peanuts out of them, you kind of lose a little bit of, for me, you lose a little bit of who they are.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I remember tuning vocals myself and discovering that some notes that a singer's reaching for, just trying to get up to that pitch, when you fix it, it takes the emotion out of the performance because it makes it sound like it was easy for them.
Yeah.
And so therefore it takes out, you remove the trying that made it compelling in the first place,
Yeah. Sometimes it's good to not quite get there, to just be on the edge, or to shoot over the top because you're just so passionate about something.
Has anybody gone in and tuned all of B.B. King's solos to see what they sound like? And I mean, you think
there's Ozzy. Somebody did that to Ozzy once, and he came into the studio and he heard it, and he's like, "Who's that? That's not me."
You mentioned tape measure, getting a tape measure out earlier. Describe to us what that means if we're new to this idea.
Yeah, it's just for me, if I have the time, and this is, these days it's not as easy, but when you're setting up your mic array around a drum kit, you essentially want to have rooms and overheads as equidistant from primarily the snare, but like in between the kick and snare, you want them to be as equidistant as you can. So you get a tape measure or a long string that you've marked, and you just make sure that the diaphragms of the microphones are equidistant from the snare or in between the kick and snare area, so that the sounds are equally hitting both sides of the overheads or room microphones.
Are you ready to launch your career in the audio or entertainment business? SAE Institute Nashville, right here in the heart of Music Row, offers hands-on programs to prepare you for the industry. From studio production and live sound to audio for film and a whole lot more. You'll learn by doing, working with professional-grade gear alongside experienced industry pros. If you're more into the business side of entertainment, SAE's Entertainment Business Program teaches essential basics like contracts and promotion to help you navigate the industry. With diploma, associate, or bachelor's degrees, there's a path for everyone. Plus, Career Services supports graduates as they take the next step. Want to see it for yourself? Immerse yourself in Nashville's exciting music scene and book a tour today at nashville.sae.edu or call 615-244-5848. Okay, have you found other important things to know about, like mic combinations and making sure that there's a quality phase relationship between, the drum with a close mic and then the next mic it might speak into, like even the overheads or an ambient mic right out in front of the kit? Or do those tend to be things that you just sort of have to follow? In other words, is there a science to like the distance and certain frequencies that is worth knowing ahead of time?
Yeah, there is physics to it. I don't pretend to know all of it for sure, but there are certain mathematical relationships you want to try to get. But if you're constrained by the size of the room and the distance and how the drummer sets up his kit, where does the ride? Is the ride right down here? Is it up there? Is it does he have a China cymbal? And if he does, you just take that straight away, first thing. But
right. I've definitely said that before on this podcast.
Yeah. I'm joking. There are lots of drummers that have them, and when they're used tastefully, it's great. It's just it turns out to be that's one of those cymbals that drummers tend to overplay.
It's too fun to hit. I think that's what it's called.
Yeah.
Okay, and then there's a reference I wanted to bring up. So Stone Sour, Gone Sovereign. Mm-hmm. That song starts out with huge tom hits in the beginning, and you just hear that low-end sustained resonance in the intro, where you're thinking like, boy, when was the last time I heard that come out of my tom, in my studio? And then the song gets cooking, and it occurs to me like, oh, now we've got very quick drums. We've got fast drum fills that include the toms. Mm-hmm. So what do we need to think about when we're considering those kind of combinations? Do you have to think separately about what you're doing in the intro?
He had two specific drums at the side that were the big low ones, right? He had two big ones on the side. So he wouldn't play those during any of the fast fills, but there were two big drums on the side for that very effect.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And then you talked about top and bottom miking drums. I think, I'm trying to remember where I did that. It was probably with Steve Albini at Electrical something. And I've tried it before at other times, but often, we're working in home studio environments. We're working in limited situations. Sure. It can be tricky to do that. What do we want to know about top and bottom miking toms? What do we want to know about even tuning a tom just to make it sound great?
Well, tuning a tom, you definitely, like, I'm not the greatest tom tuner, to be honest, and I love working with great drum techs or a drummer who really understands their kit. That's primary. And if they don't, then I've got a number of guys that can come in and tune the drum properly. I think for me, the key is if you can, using the same, not the same mic at the top as the top and bottom, but the same mics all on the top and the same mics all on the bottom, with maybe the exception of the floor tom. You could have something that's a little bit more like an RE20 underneath instead of a 421 underneath or something like that. But I tend to try to use like a 57 on the top and a 421 on the bottom, something along that line. So you've got, dynamics all around it, unless you could use like a well-padded 87 on them, or 414 or something like that. But primarily try to keep the character of your microphones the same so that your toms relate to each other.
Right. So a 57 makes a good, totally usable top mic for tom drums.
Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily use it if that was my only microphone. If I was just miking the tops of the toms, I wouldn't necessarily use a 57. A 57 has a great attack.
Right.
So, I would use that.
Get the detail.
If you could use a 451 on the top if your drummer's not a real thumper, right? If they're a more subtle, jazzier or lighter thing, you could do that. You could use like a more of a condenser microphone. But if you've got a drummer like the ones that I end up working with that are, strong hitters, you want a dynamic microphone.
Yeah. And then the bottom head is where sort of the resonance is coming, coming through.
Yeah, and when you're working on the sound, you bring the both of them up. Make sure, obviously, flip the phase of the bottom one. That's
okay.
That's the obvious thing. But making sure that that the resonances are similar between the two heads, that you've got them, and the tuning of them has. If you want the bend or if you don't want to have the bend, you make sure that you try to get it. As close as you can and in pitch, depending on the notes that you want.
Did you say the bend? Bend
well, yeah,
the pitch, drop.
Sometimes toms will do that. You can have that, or sometimes you don't want it. It depends on the song.
Yeah,
it really is the key for me is like you're tuning the drums and you're working with them, but you're listening to the song that you're playing, so that you're tuning them. Not necessarily that the toms are in tune. You can if you can get it in the key of the song, that's great. That's not always possible. But if you can get them in that area, then you can have it where the drums are really related to the song because the toms are in the key.
Now, what about making heavy records the way that some of the drum stuff is thought about a little differently, like the kick drum, for example? On a heavy record, it's sort of funny to think about the word heavy, and yet one of the features of a kick drum on a heavy record is lots of top.
Lots of top end,
so you really hear it.
Yeah, that's a sort of more, prog metal, math metal kind of thing where this. I mean, you have to have it as not as thin, but you have to have it as articulate as you can because there's a lot of playing on it.
Right. It's fast.
So, and a lot of those sounds are sample-based things that you're recording the drum kit, but you're just recording triggers for the sound that the drummers actually want to have. Right. It's not my favorite thing, to be honest with you. I prefer to have a warmer, organic sounding drum kit, but I understand that in some areas it's like, no, we need the articulation, it needs to be fast, we need to hear all the parts that we're doing with both my feet.
Now, with your work with Rush, were you able to record Neil?
Just for the live recording. So,
and then were you able to? Are you allowed to talk about it? Were you able to not use triggers later when it came to mixing that stuff? Yeah,
primarily. Yeah. No, I mean, there might have been a couple little things in there just to get a little bit more attack on certain things, but the Brad Maddox, who was the live engineer, he set the microphones, and I was taking splits off of that, and he does an amazing job. So
that's cool. And then when we think about using samples or triggers and the mics that we're using to mic up the drum kit, what's a good way for us to think about that? What are we looking for from one of those sounds, from the sample versus the actual mics in the room?
I would say what I'm looking for if I'm adding samples is any deficiencies in the drum that I'm looking for, either body or attack. And for my the techniques that I use in adding samples is not to replace anything; it's to augment. So what I want out of a sample is something that the drum itself doesn't have that I'm lacking in the mix, and I want to have, like I said, either you want some more body on the snare, you add a fatter snare sample. I have an array of different ones that I'll use it for different reasons. Do you need more attack? I don't tend to do toms too much. I really work hard on getting the tone of the toms good on their own. And I find that adding tom samples, like you can, but it's never as satisfying for me than just really working on getting a good tom sound. And then you're not fighting the room as well. Like you're hearing a
do you feel like
tom.
the toms just speak so much into the room
Exactly.
mics and everything?
Exactly. Yeah. So, but yeah, the way that I use those tools are to not replace, but to add back in some of the discrepancies I'm not hearing in the drums themselves. But I'll always get in my mixes or of the recordings that I do, I'll get the sound of the drums first and then say, oh, does it need this? Oh, and then, if I do, well, I'll throw that a little bit of this one in, a little bit of that one in, but do it as a subsequent addition if I feel like it's necessary.
And that's always happening at the mix stage, or is some of that happening at the actual recording stage where you're on playback, you're actually hearing augmentation?
The only time I'll do that is if I've really not got a good drum recording and I need the band to be excited, then I'll try to add things in at that point. But I find that when I'm in the studio, what I really want to do is focus on the performance and the writing and whatever it takes to get that. If it's like, I really can't stand that snare sound, can you do something? Then I'll add something in. But I find that people, like bands, when they're overdubbing on things, they don't tend to think about the sort of mixed quality of the drum sound at that point. They just want to play and get their guitar sound or their keyboard sound or their bass sound as great as they can and not worry about, as long as the drums are pumping and they're exciting to listen to. And I'll do like a submix of the drums so that, you've got that, excitement factor going. Yeah. But not, but not so that I'm taking up time adding samples when, the guitar player's sitting there waiting to play.
Yeah. What about some of the drum miking techniques that we see in rock records and Americana records, just other band records, like, super compressed mics, mic on the floor that's hyper compressed, blended in, stuff like that. Do you find those kind of things make their way into your drum recording technique a lot? Or do you find that with the hard hitting drummers and the rock stuff, it's more about the close mics and the room mics, and you just don't need those kind of super compressed mics blended in?
I will always, if I've got enough resources and real estate to do this, I will have like a center mic in the room that is fairly heavily compressed. If I can, one in front of the drummer, one up behind the drummer, I'll do that. Don't tend to use floor ones very often. I mean, if it's like if I have the resources and the time to be able to experiment, sure, I'll try a bunch of things. But the last thing I want to do is keep a band that's really kind of excited about playing from playing because I want to experiment.
Right.
If the band is like, we really want to experiment with the sound, so take all your time on doing that, sure, I'll do it for a while. But eventually I'll get bored too, and I'll be like, can we play some music, please?
Do you think it's advisable for us as engineers to just feel like, go ahead and put up extra mics on the drums, but don't feel like you're supposed to use them all together at the same time? It's nice have them there.
It's certainly nice to have options in a mix. It's certainly nice to have options in how you want, for what's good for the song. Like if you've got an array that you can use, you don't necessarily have to use, obviously, as you said, you don't have to use them all. But if you've got an array, you can tailor it to the nature of the song. It also allows you to to change the nature of the song as well. You're not stuck in one thing, and because it's like, you know what, we actually wanted to try this. You know, all of a sudden the band starts playing the song just like working something out, and it's like half the speed or, you know, 3/4 of the speed. It's like, hey, try the song like that. Then all of a sudden, you know, you've got a sound, you can bring it in tight and have it be like a tight, more intimate performance of that song. You're able to do that, you know, without it's like, oh, but I've got a big rock sound, and that's all that's there. So,
yeah, I think that was a learning moment for me, was realizing all those cool things you can do with mics on a drums. They're not ingredients that all have to go into the soup. You can just have all these ingredients and then mute them all. And then it can be really helpful, especially when you're doing a bunch of songs with a band and you come to another song and you realize, oh, on this song, I've got a different mic combo going.
Yep.
And I'm really glad I had it.
Yep. The mute button can be your friend.
Yeah, the mute button. I think the mute button is that's the first tool of mixing.
Yeah.
Yeah, mute button, volume, pan.
Well, it's funny, you'll laugh at me for this, but in my mixes, especially if I'm being sent something that I didn't record, I will still go through and with every instrument and cut in and around, even if it's like digital silence, I'll still cut in and around with the Pro Tools mutes. I know it probably does nothing, but for me, especially if I don't know the song, it's actually a great way for me to really get myself learned knowledge on the song. So I can go through, it's like, oh yeah, and this comes in there. And I become more intimate with the song by cutting in and around all the parts, even though I know I don't need to necessarily do that.
Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound weak and distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift for you to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding a lot more like professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. And the best part is, these mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you're in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One, Reaper, or anything you can think of. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. So to reiterate what you're saying for clarity, in the same way that you would have had to mute and unmute on a console when it was playing off tape, you're doing the same thing even on Pro Tools, just sort of programming that in.
Exactly. I know because it's not necessary to do, but it is actually with some effects. Some effects actually do have a noise to them, and it does tend to make things cleaner. It's a cumulative thing, but it's also, for me, it's like I then get to know the song more intimately by being able to, you know, massage each and every part and cut in and around. It's like, oh yeah, and then I can see what's going on, but I can also know, now that I've done it, I know where things come in and you know.
Yeah, I remember my school project, I went into the studio and we had it was a Neotech console, and we could do some automation. I remember rocking the tape to find the time code just perfect to mute and unmute everything. And then when I played it back, it really did sound so much tighter as a result of that.
Yeah.
Okay, so you had mentioned earlier the process of selecting a studio based on where's the band going to feel comfortable. So that leads me to the question I wanted to ask you of just simply, how would you set up a rock band for tracking in the studio? And how do you decide when to capture a live band performance versus layering tracks individually?
It really depends on the band. It really depends on how the band has rehearsed, whether they can play together. I've had experiences where, you know, like with a band like Tool, they work so hard on their arrangements and they rehearse so much that by the time you get to the studio, they're playing like a great band. And so, you know, now we then go and overdub guitars as well, but they will be able to capture a performance as a band. And for me, it's only about isolation if you can. You want to isolate the elements. So if you don't want to use that guitar performance, but the drum performance is great, you're not stuck. Sight lines are always very important. You You want to be able to have the band communicate. So if they can be in the room and their amp's somewhere else, that's even better.
Are some rooms just a lot louder than others?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, some are more reflective, some are tighter. I mean, if they're too much, you set up gobos around and try and tame it as much as you can. But I want to have as much air around the drums as you can get, and but have people be able to, especially these days with individual mixes and in-ear monitors, it's a lot easier than it used to be.
So people can do in-ears even in the studio.
Yeah.
That's common now.
Yeah.
I'm seeing that with drummers. I haven't seen that much with anybody else in the studio yet. But what do you have any feelings about how loud musicians are listening to stuff these days in their headphones?
I don't think it's any different from before.
It used to
Especially the drummers. They listen loud. Yeah. You try to say, but they want it loud.
Yeah. Do you go out there on the floor as a producer and put on headphones and
Sometimes.
have a mic in your hand and stuff like that?
Sometimes. Sometimes I'll sit in. It depends on how much direction the band needs when they're playing. Again, if you've got a band that's really tight and knows what they're doing, I don't need to do that.
All right.
Unless there are dramatic arrangement changes we want to try while recording. But I mean, I do that in the rehearsal. I'll sit in the middle of the band and or just off to the side, play, and it's that way you can direct. You can go, oh no, and the chorus is coming here, and you can count them in for a chorus or whatever. You can be more part of the process.
Yeah, it's easier to have that communication and line of sight yourself.
For sure.
All right, so we're getting to the end here, but let me ask you this question about guitars. So obviously guitars are very important in a lot of these heavy bands that you're recording. What, you started out at Grant Ave and, you learned something about recording guitars back then, and guitar recording has probably come a long way, or it's evolved. You can tell me whether it's come a long way or not. But what do you want to say about how to record guitars?
I think, but there's all kinds of great amp manufacturers out there nowadays and boutique amps and stuff like that, and that's great. Yeah. For me, it's the fundamentals. Like where are you on the cone? Are you on axis? Are you off axis? How many microphones are you using? Are they in phase? Have you checked the phase of them? And it's not just one. I got shown this really great technique. It's very labor intensive, but if you have got the time, you will essentially, if you're multi-miking a cabinet and multi-cabinets, which I often do, start with one, get it sounding, putting it on the cone, on the position of the cone that you want, whether on or off axis. Then go to your second mic and you use like a pink noise. And you have to do this on headphones, and it's quite loud, and it's, you have to be careful with it, but you essentially try to move the second mic around with the pink noise while the other one is out of phase, and you just try and cancel as much as you can. Then when you flip them back in phase, you're getting as much you're not comb filtering anything as much as you can.
Right.
You just keep going down the line. It can take a long time to do it, but it's a great technique to make sure that your phase isn't a problem in your guitar sound. And then you can just say, okay, well, is the microphone the right choice, or is the tonality of the amplifier the right way that we want it? So, it's a bit, I'm sort of oversimplifying the process, but you really need to work in tandem with an assistant or another engineer, and have them be able to flip phases while you're listening in the headphones and placing microphones. And it's easier with in-ears because you can use in-ears and then headphones over the top and really not listen that loud, and you can really get a good accurate representation of the microphone and its relationship with the other microphones and the cabinet. But it's
and then make sure you tighten the mic stand after you do that.
And make sure you tighten the mic stand, yes.
And don't have somebody walk by and bump it.
Exactly.
That's so frustrating. In the middle of a session, somebody bumped a mic and you were in the control room and didn't see it until later. Let's see. What about guitars, in the control room and giving a guitar player a great experience as far as, this is a big difference playing in front of your amp versus playing in front of an NS10 speaker. For sure.
I like to have them in the control room for communication, but if they really want to be out by their amp, I'm not opposed to them going on a pair of headphones and doing that. again, they're probably listening pretty loud. But if that's going to get the best performance, for me, it's all about the performance, really. And I'd rather have a great performance and a good sound than a good performance and a great sound.
Do you think a guitar speaks to the amp? I mean, there's sort of obvious situations that don't.
And an amp speaks to a cabinet, you know. So in some cases, you know, I would rather have the signal boosted and then cut like like the Radial does a long, you know, guitar cable system than necessarily. I like setting up the amps in the control room, but sometimes you want that interrelationship between the actual vibration of the cabinet and the amp and the head sitting on top of it. Obviously, with a combo, it does that anyway. But I mean, again, you try different techniques, you try different things. What works best for the band? What works best for, you know, how they're feeling? Does he want his amp next to him, even though he's in the control room? Bring the amp in and run the speaker cable out.
Right.
And then again, you know, these days, you know, I'm doing some recording, you know, in this place. There are a lot of great amp simulators that people use.
Yeah.
They're getting better and better. You know, the neural DSP stuff, it's unreal for heavy sounds. Like, you know.
What about tuning? What do you want to say about tuning in the studio? Guitars?
Yeah. I'm a bit of a Nazi tuner for guitars and basses.
Do you have big old Peterson right on the console?
You check it all the time. I have whatever we're using. We're always using the same one, and we're just checking after every performance.
Yeah,
after every take.
Okay, cool. Let me ask you. Thank you for talking about those things. You know, getting into drum recording and guitars. Really awesome. I guess I didn't ask you this. So with guitars, when you're lining up those different mics, are there some go-to mics that are good choices?
I mean, there's a bunch. Yeah. Again, good dynamics, 57s, 421s, room mics. You can use 67s if you got them, 87s. You know, those are kind of old school mics that I've used and tried and true. You know, the Sennheisers, you know, there's a whole bank of them that are great. 414 sometimes, you know. I mean, they're those. Again, it's like I have ones that I go to, but then sometimes you're listening, it's like, well, that's not quite working. What else you got? And then you go through the mic, you know, the mic closet and see what's there and try that. So, you know, I'm not opposed to trying different things. Heavy amps and heavy mics, you know, I tend to like good solid dynamics if you can. They take the abuse.
Yeah.
But I'll throw a you know, I mean, a D112 on an amp sometimes. It's nicer, an RE20.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Awesome. Now you've got some new projects I think you're working on too. You had mentioned Johnny Faye, Nassau Cloud record.
Yeah, we mixed that record at my last studio. Yeah, he's great, Johnny. I'm actually going to get him to play drums on a new project that I'm developing as well. But yeah, that was really exciting to do. It was an instrumental project, very atmospheric.
Going back to your roots.
Going back to my ambient roots. That's right. No, and it was lovely. And Johnny's a dream to work with. He's so sweet. And yeah, no, it was a great pleasure. That was awesome. I mean, it's out now. You should, you know, put it up if you can on the ad for it, because it's a nice record to listen to. It's
okay,
really beautiful.
Great.
It would be great in immersive. I'd love to do an immersive of that actually too.
I'll see if we have it in the in our Spotify playlist. We may want to add that still.
Yeah,
I'm not sure if it's in there yet. And then another one you mentioned was Jay Willow.
Jay Willow, yeah, he's an artist I'm developing from Toronto, singer songwriter. I want to get Johnny to play drums on that if I can, and yeah, he's got a really strong character in his voice. Writes very emotional and sultry songs. So yeah, he's something pretty special, I think.
So put the vocal tuner away.
Yeah. For him, I mean, he's a great singer. He doesn't really need it. You know,
is he a guitar strumming singer?
Yeah. Acoustic
so are
guitar,
you going to
plays acoustic guitar?
You're going to be faced with the question of, you know, pitch center and playing and singing at the same time versus guitar first singing second.
Yep. But I will see if he can do it separately. It'll be easier for the tonality of the acoustics. And if I want to build and blend acoustics, then make more. But yeah, if he needs to sing and play at the same time, then we'll be trying to separate the mics as much as we can.
That's wild. Yeah. It's really fascinating to me how much a vocal performance can change if the guitar is being played at the same time.
Yeah.
It's
a full body experience.
It's also very fascinating when a really great vocalist steps up to the mic and just seems to just magically nail the pitch in an overdub with headphones too. I've worked with many singers like that. So this is a closing question, David. This is we're going to take the Wayback Studio machine. It's hypothetical, and you get to go back in time and you find young David and you say, "Listen, dude, stop the lawnmower for a second. I got to talk to you." And you say, "I've come back to give you this one bit of advice. Here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day." What advice would you like to go back and give yourself if you could?
I'd say, well, trust your instincts and don't second guess yourself. Make your decision and run with it and be confident with it. I think that was probably the thing that held me back in a lot of cases, was just not being confident in my own abilities. Obviously, when you're learning, I didn't overstep and I tried to figure things out. But once I was fairly solid in the studio, there were times where I would question. It was like, do I know what I'm doing? No, I really, and just like, if you could throw that away and just be like, you know what? I'm confident in my own tastes and in my own abilities. And if somebody's having a problem, then it's their problem, not mine.
Right on. Good advice. Good advice. Well, thank you again, David, for joining us on the podcast. Please let the Rockstars know where they could find you online. What if they need to reach out to you? What if they're ready to make their next big hit, massive sounding record?
Okay, well, I'm reachable both on Instagram. It's the official David Botrill, and I have a website that's probably the easiest to get to, and there's forms on there to fill out for collaboration requests. So it's just davidbottrill.com.
That's awesome. Well, dude, thank you so much for joining us. Rockstars, thanks for watching and hanging with us on this interview. Please kick that like button and subscribe to the channel so you get more of these great interviews from us here at Recording Studio Rockstars. And David, I look forward to meeting you around the studio.
I will look forward to that too, Lee. It's nice to be introduced to you, and this has been a lot of fun.
Thanks so much. Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible: iZotope, Native Instruments, Atom Audio, and SAE Institute. And remember to take advantage of our special coupon codes at iZotope.com and nativeinstruments.com. Use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plug-in purchase. And don't forget, you can start mixing right now with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, please check out our sponsors using the links in the show notes. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. Also, please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel because it's a great way for you to help support this show. I'd also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko and Liz Hulitskaya. Thanks so much for watching and listening, Rockstars. We'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.